This is week 158 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. It's been 9 days since the shocking argument in the Oval Office that triggered widespread criticism of U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance for publicly berating Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a wartime leader of a U.S. ally. I said last Sunday that I hoped we were in for a calmer week following the incident. Unfortunately, we were not. The early days of the week were marked by Trump and his team calling for Zelensky to apologize for the exchange and threatening to withdraw various forms of support to Ukraine. On Monday, Reuters announced that the White House was preparing a plan to lift sanctions on several Russian entities and individuals as part of peace negotiations, undermining the work of his predecessor and threatening to at least partially bail Russia out of the state it's gotten itself into with its war. Zelensky did make a social media post on Tuesday, saying that the events of the previous Friday had been regrettable, and that he was committed to building peace, which one would argue is the closest he could come to fulfilling Trump's demands without outright taking responsibility for what happened. Still, that same day, a senior Trump official told Bloomberg that the president had halted all military aid to Ukraine, a freeze that came into effect almost immediately as Poland reported that no further American military equipment was being transported across Ukraine's western border. A day later, on Wednesday, CIA Chief John Ratcliffe confirmed that the U.S. had also halted the sharing of all intelligence with Ukraine. The halt of military aid is obviously a devastating blow to Ukraine, one that Russia is almost certain to take advantage of on the battlefield and against Ukraine's civilians and infrastructure, which will be left more defenseless than they've been since the early days of the full-scale invasion. So, what are the most immediate effects of stopping the flow of intelligence? It means that Ukraine is now on the back foot and its position on the battlefield is weakened, as it races to fill the voids left by the US. It means that Ukraine is now much less able to conduct time-sensitive strikes, as US intelligence is often needed to hit movable Russian targets. Sky News claimed that the new restrictions are mostly aimed at this capability, and that taking away the ability to properly launch strikes is intended by the US to apply pressure to Ukraine. But worrying as well is the fact that without US intelligence, Ukraine has lost at least partial capability to detect incoming attacks on its cities and infrastructure. I'd like to elaborate on this point quickly. Nowhere in Ukraine is safe from air raids, and they can happen at any time. But over the last 3 years, Ukrainians have built an extensive formal and informal alert network through military sources, OSINT, and volunteers, which means that at any given moment you have a rough sense of whether your location is at risk, and you usually have a decent amount of warning and can get to a shelter before things get loud. Here in Kyiv, there are usually at least 30-minute warnings before drone attacks, and a shorter window, but still at least a few minutes, for ballistic missiles and other fast-moving projectiles. In Kyiv, it's not unheard of that something slips past detection and blows up before the warning siren can be sounded, but it's certainly been an exception, not the rule. Regardless of location, after 3 years, most Ukrainians have developed a sense of how to read the alert system and react to threats at their own discretion, with many adults only going to the shelter for the most urgent and severe warnings. So, in short, when I say that Ukraine's ability to detect incoming attacks may be compromised, I mean that daily life for all Ukrainians has the potential to get much more dangerous and much scarier. One other particularly cutting development occurred on Thursday when Reuters reported that the White House was planning to revoke the temporary legal status of 240,000 Ukrainian refugees who fled to America after the start of the full-scale invasion. The White House dismissed the report as fake news, but didn't deny that such a move was being considered. If implemented, this action could pave the way for a mass deportation of Ukrainians from America, a phrase I never thought I would say. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said that these developments aren't set in stone and Trump may lift them once peace negotiations are arranged and confidence has been regained. It was announced late on Thursday that American and Ukrainian delegations have resumed work and will meet again in Saudi Arabia this coming week, with President Zelensky saying that he hopes the meeting will be meaningful. But the bottom line for this week is that whether Ukraine wins back the confidence of the U.S. or not, Ukraine and Europe themselves will be slow to forget the events of the last few days. The halt of aid and intelligence has called into question whether the US could ever be considered a reliable ally again, after withdrawing support for and pressuring its long-term allies under great duress. As Trump claims that peace talks are moving forward amid America's increasing alignment with Russia, the battle continues to rage with devastating consequences for Ukrainians. This week was tragically marked by funerals that illustrate the dichotomy between Ukraine's enormous sacrifice and the contempt shown to it by its longtime ally.
On February 27th, writer Svetlana Povalyeva announced the death of her 28-year-old son Vasyl Ratushny, who was killed in combat by an FPV drone strike. Vasyl was the older brother of Roman Ratushny, a well-known Ukrainian activist who was killed near Izum in the Kharkiv Oblast in June 2022. Nearly 500 people joined the funeral service, which began at Mikhailovsky Cathedral and moved to the Independence Square, the heart of Ukraine's revolution of dignity, where both Vasyl and Roman once stood, protesting against then-government's abuse of power and Russian influence. Their sacrifice is why so many Ukrainians reject the idea of ceasefire that rewards Russian aggression. Because for them, this war isn't just about territory. It's about making sure the next generations don't have to die defending their home. When politicians are talking about the price of this war, it's important to never forget that Ukrainians truly know the price of this war, because the price of this war is not counted in money, it's counted in human lives, in young Ukrainians who have been defending their land for over a decade.
One sentiment repeated many times this week is that maybe America's increasing isolation will finally force Europe to rearm and stand on its own. From France considering expanding its nuclear umbrella to the EU announcing a large-scale plan to rearm itself, it does indeed look like the end result of Trump's choices may be a militant and self-sufficient Europe, although it's far from unilaterally decided among EU member states how best to achieve this. On Thursday night, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled a comprehensive €800 billion plan entitled Rearm Europe, designed to bolster the continent's defensive capabilities and provide immediate military support to Ukraine. The plan consists of 5 points designed to increase defense spending, as well as defense procurement and production. European leaders expressed strong support for the initiative. During the emergency EU summit in Brussels, leaders agreed to loosen budget restrictions, enabling willing EU countries to boost their defense budgets. The 27 leaders present urged the European Commission to invest substantially in new defense and proposed a €150 billion loan for new military equipment. European countries have also been reassessing defense strategy on an individual level in the wake of Trump's recent actions. French President Emmanuel Macron went on television on Wednesday to propose extending France's nuclear capability, saying that it would be madness not to take action at the present moment. Remember, France and the UK are the only two European nations that have nuclear weapons. Macron highlighted the threat of the growing Russian military-industrial complex and cautioned that Europe must be ready for a future in which the US can no longer be counted on as an ally. The proposal to expand France's nuclear capacity was received well by other European nations, particularly to the east. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk described the plan as very promising, emphasizing, though, that the matter should be treated with utmost gravity. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda also expressed support for the idea, saying that it would be a strong deterrent against future attacks on NATO. France's proposal was less warmly received by Russia, with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying that Macron is preparing to use nuclear weapons specifically against Russia, and Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov calling the remarks an escalation. President Zelensky also announced this week that Ukraine, together with the EU, is drafting a plan for sustainable peace that ensures security guarantees for Ukraine and stability for wider Europe. Whether this peace plan is the one that finally lays the groundwork for an end to the war or not, the cooperation stands as a rebuttal of Trump's assertion that Ukraine does not want peace. It's becoming increasingly clear that the issue is not Ukraine's lack of desire for peace, but rather that the US definition of peace doesn't account for the sovereignty and long-term safety of Ukraine. My colleague Francis was at the European Council on Thursday and can give a bit more insight on the mood there. I'll hand it over to him.
The Kyiv Independent is here in Brussels, where just over the past hour, European leaders, including Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, arrived for an extraordinary European Council summit dedicated to the question of Ukraine in times when it looks like the United States seems to be aligning itself with Moscow. It's still less than a week since that unbelievable incident between President Zelensky and US President Donald Trump, Vice President JD Vance in the White House. And now we can see that Europe is finally, hopefully, waking up. Today, at an extraordinary European Council meeting, we have seen Europe together with Zelensky come together on two main issues: upping their own defense spending to reduce their dependence on the United States, which no longer seems to want to guarantee European security, and upping help for Ukraine. Of course, when it comes to braver steps that are required to really guarantee Ukraine's security both before and after a potential ceasefire, that will depend more on the bilateral talks, the emergence of a so-called coalition of the willing, potentially led by France, maybe the UK and Poland and other actors. And in the next few weeks, I guess, we might see how brave these countries are willing to get.
We're introducing a new segment in which members of the Kyiv Independent community can submit questions to be answered at the end of each episode. When you become a member of our community, you get access to our Discord server, where we have ongoing community discussions about our news coverage, Ukrainian language learning, and more. And there's now a channel where I'll share the topics of the week with you in advance. You guys can submit questions, and we'll select a few every week to answer. You can find out more about membership at the link in the description below. The US is trying to build up opposition to Zelensky by making contacts with opposition parties. How serious is the threat? Could it create tension or chaos in Ukraine? How will Ukraine respond to that? Politico reported this week that Trump's team spoke with two Ukrainian opposition politicians, former President Petro Poroshenko and former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. We also heard rumors about meetings with these and other figures in Ukraine. A lot of people saw this as America trying to scout out candidates to run against Zelensky in a future election. This is extremely alarming that the US is seemingly preparing to interfere in a foreign election. But it also shows that Trump's team is completely misreading the situation in Ukraine. First, the majority of Ukrainians don't want elections during the war. And second, neither Poroshenko nor Tymoshenko has a shot of winning an election against Zelensky anytime in the foreseeable future. As Trump's team attacks Zelensky and calls for his removal, an increasing number of Ukrainians are standing behind their president. As an American who fully supports Ukraine, how should I support Ukraine now that Trump the traitor has fully sided with his master Putin? I presently give to SOF and several other groups, but I want to do more. Thank you for asking this. We recently made a guide to navigating this question, which includes everything from how to find a protest near you to which brands to avoid because they've kept up operations in Russia. And I can't overstate just how important it is to just keep Ukraine visible and in the conversation. Putin wants to paint Ukraine as completely forgotten by the West, and it's through people like you that he's proven wrong. Going beyond the well-known polls, what is the mood of people in Ukraine? Is there still a will to fight on, too exhausted to go on, determined to fight because there are no other options, and how does the betrayal by Trump affect Ukrainians? So, as the fourth year of war has just started, it's of course a moment of extreme exhaustion and grief. It's an overwhelming amount of news to react to each day, and aside from being scary and degrading, it's just plain sad. There's a lot of long-standing love and trust in America that's undermined because of this administration. Still, It's important to remember that Ukrainians have survived worse than Trump and know from experience that action achieves far more than catastrophizing. This is a country where almost the entire adult population has lived through multiple revolutions and 11 years of war. Trump won't be the thing to kill their will to fight on. With that being said, the events of the last few weeks have shown that Ukraine can only truly rely on itself, with civilian-funded campaigns popping up to support the military. Everyone knows that the alternative to fighting is annihilation, and are far from ready to throw in the towel. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. At the Kyiv Independent, reader contributions are our main source of revenue. Shows like Ukraine This Week are only made possible by the donations big and small of viewers like you. If you'd like to get more involved in the Kyiv Independent community, we have several membership tiers that give you access to our Discord community, Q&As with our staff, and a 15% discount on our merch. There will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.